I was born, baptized, and attended elementary school right down the street from here. Literally. If you exit this building and walk up Nostrand Avenue for about 15 minutes, you'll pass the Church of St. Jerome's and St. Jerome's School. That's me. Most people call this area the Flatbush section of Brooklyn, but the locals here call it Little Haiti. And as a child of Haitian immigrants, you learn 3 things. Lesson 1, if you pass your elders and you don't say good morning, they'll likely ask you, did we sleep in the same house last night? Lesson 2, if you get a B+ in any of your classes, your parents will likely ask you, where's the rest? I thought you'd at least get an A. And lesson 3, if you have a problem saving money, then boy, you better join a SouSou. Lesson 3 is the one that stuck with me the most. For those who aren't familiar, a SouSou is a community pool of funds in which each participant makes a weekly contribution to the pool. And as a result, they get a distribution of the entire pool's value on a specified date. It requires a lot of trust. And you're probably thinking this is happening at like a local bank or something, right? But no, it's happening at one of the elders' homes directly in the neighborhood. So when I was young and my parents were saving up for their first house, they entered a SouSou. Every week, and I mean every single week, my parents went to the same house to contribute to their SouSou. That time in my life, it really set a huge impression on me. It taught me the value of community economics. It taught me the value of the discipline that's required for saving. But the thing that impressed me the most was when they got that payout. I was like 9, 10 years old, and I had never seen so much money in my life. So as a result, I fell in love with money. My entire teenage life, I saved every dime that I got, from shoveling snow in the winters to my birthdays. And during that time, I felt like a superhero with a big S on my chest. The SouSou man. Lending money to all my friends in the neighborhood. So when it came time to choose a major in college, the only thing that made sense was finance. Because, you know, I learned how to make SouSous and stuff, right? College was great. And as a finance major, you learn how financial institutions interact with each other. You learn how banks lend money to other banks. And more importantly, your professors drill it in your head that Wall Street is completely different than Main Street. Even in my senior year, we learned about corporate and municipal bonds and how corporations and municipalities go to bond investors and ask to borrow money. And they pay them a profit. It's called interest, right? And I thought to myself in class, like, man, I'm a really bad bond investor. I keep lending money to my friends for free. What's my problem, man? What's up? Immediately after college, I got my first job in the SouSou industry. Nah, I mean the financial industry. At 21, I was doing mortgage and interest rate research at a Wall Street bank. And, you know, learning about mortgages and interest rates at a really young age, you learn a lot of cool stuff. I learned how they took mortgages, like my parents, and packed them into these pools. They called them bonds. And they sold them to investors all over the world. It was like one really big SouSou. I was like, damn, y'all, how you get a SouSou so big? But of course, when you're learning something great, there are parts of it that's not so great. The mortgage process itself is extremely complicated. And most of the people that were signing up for these mortgages, they were just looking to buy their first house. They didn't really understand what it was. I remember this one instance. I was on the phone with a customer, and they were telling me, look, man, I was just trying to get this house. I didn't really understand what a mortgage is. Can you explain it to me? And this, mind you, this is a person who bought a house. I had to tell them, a mortgage is a note. Your bank holds on to the deed to your house until you pay off the note. And then after you pay off the note, they give you the deed. And he was like, what? I don't even own my house? I was like, not yet. So that moment and that conversation really told me that I need to use what I've learned and shared with others. So because of that, I created a financial literacy platform. I called it Raising Benjamin. The same year I created Raising Benjamin, I started my first year in law school. And one of the first classes you take in law school is contract law. And I'm gonna tell y'all right now, don't take contract law. Contract law is extremely complicated. They have all these rules for what an offer is. And then all these other rules about what constitutes acceptance of the offer. And then they have a bunch of other rules about what to do if somebody fails to perform. I was like, yo, this just sounds like a really complicated way to get a bunch of people who didn't know each other to get into a SouSou. And toward the end of my first year, one of my professors briefly spoke about these things called pooled income trusts, where people actually use these to pay down their income so that they can continue to qualify for Medicare and Medicaid and low-income housing. And when they put their money in the trust, they have the option to withdraw the money for supplemental purchases or for emergencies. And in law school, we have these little microphones. Every student gets one, and you turn it on if you have something to say or if you want to answer a question. So I turned my microphone on and I said, hey, why would you have such a complicated name for something that's just a SouSou? And that moment in class, it hit me. My entire career and my entire education, I was taught that Wall Street is a completely different place than Main Street. But in reality, they're one and the same. Main Street is Wall Street and Wall Street is Main Street. And I'm gonna give y'all an example. If you work at a company in this room, right? Anyone here work at a company, you probably make a contribution on a bi-weekly basis to your 401k, right? And your 401k has a portfolio manager, a 401k portfolio manager, and he takes your money and invests it in companies all over the world, companies that you probably never even heard of before. If you're a civil servant, like a police officer or a teacher or a firefighter, you make bi-weekly contributions to your pension. And your pension has a pension fund manager. And he also takes that money and invests it in companies all over the world. Companies you probably never heard of. See, all these companies, all these places, funded by us in this room. So as I'm in class and I'm having this existential crisis, I start to ask myself really heavy questions. Questions like, if we can afford to fund companies like Facebook and Ford, why is it so difficult for us to fund our own communities? If we're able to fund so many different places and we're able to raise so much money, why is it so difficult for people who grew up in Flatbush and Bed-Stuy? Why is it so difficult for them to buy homes in the areas that they live in? Why do they have to suffer under the thumb of gentrification? Why is it so difficult, and why do we feel so powerless in fighting to stay? These are some heavy questions, and there's no simple answer to any of them. But there's always two things that stand out to me. One of them is a mindset. It's a mindset that Wall Street and Wall Street alone are the sole arbiters of who and what gets funded, when really it's us. And two, we felt as if we had limited tools. And I'll give you an example of that. For example, a SouSou. A SouSou is an amazing tool to help you save your money. But there are limitations, right? You can't claim your SouSou on your taxes. I wish I could. You can't use your SouSou as some sort of collateral for a mortgage or a small business loan. SouSous aren't regulated by any regulatory agency in the government. So as powerful as this tool is, it still limits our ability to accumulate traditional wealth and enter the middle class. But today we have tools. See, in 2012, Barack Obama, the great Barack Obama, signed the Jobs Act into law. And the Jobs Act was a few years after the recession, and one of his goals out of that was to jumpstart America's businesses. And there are certain exceptions, Title I through Title III exceptions, that basically create a few new tools. One of those tools is crowdfunding equity platforms. Now, crowdfunding equity platforms allow us to invest directly in businesses that we believe in. These businesses do not have to go through these dramatic IPOs. We don't need to go and visit a stockbroker in order to invest in them. We can literally log on to something they call the funding portal, pick a business that we believe in, or pick a business that's directly in our community and invest in it. And in an area like Flatbush, that's very vital because we already know historically, black people specifically have had problems with getting small business loans from banks. But it's real easy for black people to get credit cards from banks. And through this venture capital revolution, there was research done by this company called CD Insights that found that even though black people are 11% of America's population, less than 1% of black founders get venture capital funding. And I was like, damn. See, I personally know a friend of mine who used a crowdfunding equity platform. He created this app called App. And basically, his goal, he had one job and one job only. He said, I'm going to get everybody one free appetizer at any restaurant every single day. So he logged on to a crowdfunding equity platform called WeFunder, and he raised over $200,000 to see his dream come true. I was like, damn, bro, I never would have thought you could raise $200,000. That's incredible. So we have a second tool, and it's called real estate equity crowdfunds. And real estate equity crowdfunds allow us to invest directly into real estate without having to use traditional financial means. Usually, you have to invest through this thing they call a REIT that you have to buy on the open market. And a REIT is a real estate investment trust. But with a real estate equity crowdfund, you can log on to a website and invest directly through there. Now, I'll give you an example of how it works. Let's say everybody in this room had picked me because I had gotten SEC approval to create a real estate equity crowdfund. Everyone in this room could put money into the crowdfund and have equity. And I can take this money and buy empty plots of land directly in your neighborhood. I can buy empty pieces of property that have been laying there forever and nobody bought it. And then I can reconvert these homes into affordable housing for the people who live there. And in an area like Flatbush that's dealing with gentrification, buying the available properties would be very powerful for us. We could really find a way to reclaim our neighborhoods. My parents and their generation had their SouSou. It gave them the ability to buy their first home and entry into the middle class. Personally, it's what put me on the stage before you today. And when I was 9, it gave me my own driveway so I could play basketball in it. Because my landlord at our last spot was real tired of me doing that. My generation, we have our own SouSou. And I pray that it does so much more. Thank you.